Hello and welcome to the first episode of So the Funny Thing Is. I'm Marlaina Schiavo.
And I'm Joe Carducci.
Hello, Joe.
Hi, Marlaina. How are you?
I am doing well. Although my head is spinning a little bit because we have so much to talk about. This has been the busiest news cycle I can remember in a long time.
It feels like this week alone feels like 10 years, right? I just feel like I don't know why there were 7 Thursdays this week.
I feel like ever since the debate, it's just been a marathon of breaking news, and it's all been political. Like, I don't even know people, today there was a power outage, right? In the South. And I'm like, was there? Because all I can think about is the last 4 days of the RNC. And now we're going to jump right in. So
Yeah,
we should probably tell the audience that, I'm a registered independent, and I always say I lean common sense. And
I am a lifelong bleeding heart liberal. Very proud Democrat. Definitely not the leftist of the left, but certainly not the center. I also I like to think that I have a good fair common sense. Yeah, I'm not the the extreme. I don't like the extreme positions on anything, but I am definitely a very proud Democrat.
I don't like extreme positions on anything, and I think the extremes. Actually, I think I'm just non-committal, and I've always, actually, believe it or not, Joe, I've always voted Democrat.
Huh.
And except for the last New Jersey gubernatorial, I went with Jack Ciattarelli.
Okay, well, that was a very close race, and then we diverge on that there too, but that's okay because we're gonna do that, right?
We are. We're gonna agree. We're gonna disagree, and then we're gonna agree to disagree, and everything in between, right?
Right, because it is actually possible to do that. I know. A lot of people think, particularly for me, that I am known for digging in and punching a little rough. But at the end of the day, and with your family and your friends and the people in your lives, you got to kind of find a way to have disagreements and sort of come to a consensus, at least that you still care about each other and that you can agree to disagree.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, the diversion, the most diversion, or the most separation I've seen, right, in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime, it had started during the pandemic. That's when all of the clause started coming out. I mean, I guess it started a little bit earlier in the Trump administration, when Trump won in 2016. I felt like that's when things got a little bit more aggressive, in general, but not the way we saw it in 2020 and onward. But speaking of Trump, he had the longest speech last night. I was having a hard time keeping my eyes open. I had to actually watch the end of it this morning because it went on and on and on. Yes. I did notice one thing on your Twitter feed, or excuse me, X feed this morning, formerly known as Twitter. I don't know when we're going to stop saying that.
I'm not.
Which is never.
Yeah.
I keep saying Elon Musk has to break up with his ex because no one's not catching on.
Right.
But I did notice that you definitely had some words about the fact that Donald Trump said the crowd thought he was dead. Let's start with that.
Yeah. I mean, let's just unpack a little bit about that. Was crazy. I mean, it was like Kafka-esque. It was, what is happening? Like, the backdrop was from the shooting. And I'm just going to put this out there first and foremost. I do not condone any violence of any kind, particularly political violence at all. I think what happened when Donald Trump was shot at was horrific. And I will continue to say that I do not condone political violence, but it was a little bit weird to see the framing of the Republican National Convention nominee standing in front of like the scene sort of that event. Like, that was a little jarring and strange. And then the first, 10 minutes or more was him recounting some version of what happened that day with its own Trumpian spin. And the spin started actually becoming the narrative during the speech. You could feel it unfolding. It was so strange because it was like, it was a warm, sunny day and this happened, and fact. And then it morphed to jump the shark, like his favorite underwater creature, when he started talking about the crowd didn't move because they were standing there worried that he'd been shot in the head and that he was dead. And I was like, I watched it a lot of times. I mean, we've all seen those clips probably, I don't know, a dozen times, just by accident, not even seeking it out. And
he never once thought he was critically wounded at that point, right? Yeah. But I think the crowd also knew. I mean, I think the onlookers, not the crowd that was there, but people like us, just to give him a little bit of credit if I can, it's like we weren't there, right? We watched the clips. We knew he stood up within 15 seconds and pumped his fist and walked off.
Yeah.
However, they did not know anything, right? They heard shots. And if you were someone in the crowd, I would imagine if I heard a shot and I see Trump go down or anybody go down, you're kind of looking around, right? You're kind of looking around to see what's going on, and you hear more shots. And then you look up and you don't see Trump, right? And you see a pile of humans and Trump is somewhere in the scrum. I would imagine that maybe there were some people that had no clue what was happening within a 20-second span, at least, if 30 seconds, however long he was down for. So it's possible that people were so confused and not knowing what was going on and your adrenaline's pumping that they could be like, oh my God, did they just shoot, President Trump, right?
I'm not saying that. Oh yeah, no, that's definitely possible that they thought that. I'm saying his framing was that they didn't move in solidarity. They didn't move from their places because they believed that he had been shot in the head and was dead. And he even said, all of them, everyone thought I was dead. And so it's like, so while you can frame it, and I agree with you, right? That's a totally logical, rational, reasonable thing to say. It was crazy if you were standing there or in the crowd behind or in front of him. Yeah. Anything you don't know. First of all, you didn't even know there were shots in many cases because a lot of people didn't even know listening to the audio if it was shots or if it was fireworks or whatever. And people in the crowd said the same. But that's what's so Trumpian about it is that it's not, it's those facts, that set of facts. And then you take those facts and then you put them in a blender and you throw in like all this like dramatic lies, let's say, all these dramatic lies and mistruths and propaganda, and you blend it all up and then you pour it back out. And it's like, but that's not, because what he said was they all thought I had been shot in the head, that I was dead, and they weren't moving in solidarity to show support for me. And then it was like that. No, but see, so that's like, I could totally agree with the logical, reasonable assertion that you made, but then it's like, okay, but at some point he becomes very Trumpian, and then it felt like we're talking about Jesus, because he said, and then I knew I had to stand, I had to rise so that they could see, that I was fighting, and that's why I did the fight thing. And we can probably agree that religion doesn't necessarily have a place in our political discourse. And there was a lot of that last night. And that was one of them that where I felt like, is he really comparing himself to Jesus right now? I don't know. So,
well, he has done that in the past, actually.
Yes, he has. You're right.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
But also, I guess one other element of that too, there's two things here, right? So he was looking to the side because he wanted people to look at some graphic, right? So all their heads must have been turned, right? Mm-hmm. At that point. And then turn back and he's down. So there's that. Right. So, but as far as everyone thought I was dead and then they weren't moving out of solidarity, that's just hyperbole and that's Trump. Yeah. So it's almost like, and maybe he wanted to believe that. I mean, he wants to believe a lot of things that come out of his mouth, right?
Yeah. So that's the question. Does he though? Like that some part of him might believe that on some level. Like if that's what happens sometimes with narcissists, I feel like they can go either way, where it's like they're compensating for something, a failing that they deep down in their subconscious know exists, or a truth about themselves. But sometimes with him, I'm like, he might actually believe that.
Maybe, but there were so many conspiracy theories that were swirling around after that too. And people were questioning, like, it almost feels like he was kind of addressing the conspiracy theories. Like, why weren't people scrambling and why weren't they all running for their lives? I mean, there were a lot of people who ducked down and then were kind of lifting back up behind him. That's all we could see. We didn't really see anything else. Mm. And so the theories just started going. And so I guess he had to come up with a Trump reason as to why people didn't move. But I mean, it happened so fast and it ended so quickly that, I mean, the simple answer is they froze because not everybody's equipped to know how to react when they hear gunshots or something that sounds like gunshots and are trying to assess what the situation is. But okay, fine. All right, so we kind of agree, right? We kind of agree. We kind of,
Well,
okay, fine. That's a very light. That's the lightest thing he said last night, right?
Right.
When you agree.
Isn't that funny? Of all of the things of that entire, like I call it the musings of the Mango Mussolini. It was like, what? Yeah, that was pretty much the tamest of all the things. And he's talking about his being shot.
Yeah, it was. And it wasn't very him when he first started. It was a sunny day. It's almost like he didn't know how to even play that role, right? He was, it sounded unnatural coming out of his mouth. And I'm going to tell this one time because it's too painful to tell again, and it's like, I don't know. All right, fine.
He's trying to strike a serene tone when he doesn't even have that setting in his capacity, which was why it didn't feel right. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely felt a little off. At first I was kind of cringing. Yeah. And then he got into the nitty gritty, right? So, and this is where you and I are going to go in different directions here. Okay. So my takeaway from the entire speech, and we can dissect some of the things he said, but is that he said probably 90%, 95% of the right things. I'll say he said 100% of the right things for that audience, but he probably said somewhere in the 90% right things for a lot of people watching who aren't necessarily Republicans. Because
I'm waiting for
because right now people are dismayed. They're not happy with the current situation at hand, right? Let's just put women's rights aside for a second, because that's a whole separate issue. Let's talk about inflation. We talk about the border. We talk about crime, right? All of this is and war. And all of this is happening on Biden's watch. Okay. And none of this happened on Trump's watch. And a lot of people will look at this on a very surface level and say, you know what? He's right. I was doing better financially when he was in office. And we weren't at war when he was in office. And the border was not out of hand when he was in office, right? So you have people in the middle who could look at Trump and could be very much persuaded with so much that came out of his mouth. And I think that he, regardless of him being Donald Trump, could appeal to a lot of people who can't even stand the sound of his voice. That was my takeaway.
I can appreciate that. It's interesting. I think that it would require, though, that those moderates got through some really crazy rhetoric and some pretty hateful, angry, let's be honest, politically violent, inciting language. Because when he said Nancy Pelosi, he was actually attacking her. He did a hammer motion when he said Nancy Pelosi, and the crowd of course understood it. And I know that her family understood it, and I know that she understood it because that's what it was. And that's obviously a very sensitive subject for them. I just don't think that any person who was watching to hear him sort of convince them to vote for him got to a point that they were their ears were even open, if they were watching it at all, where they would have heard what resonated with them. And I also think just substantively on those issues, like starting with inflation, Trump handed a very horribly mishandled pandemic and the economy accompanying it to President Biden, and the inflation that came with the recovery of the pandemic isn't an American problem. It's a global problem, and the United States has handled it the best of all of our G7 peers. So I would say that is a messaging issue. It is not to say that inflation is not real and that we don't, as moms and human beings and parents and Americans, feel it. I just think that it's not factually accurate for Americans to lay that at the feet of the president when actually inflation has been dropping and is at the lowest rate now that it's been since, I think, 2021. But that's inflation. Crime is another one where this is just factually true. Crime is actually not increasing, and it's actually decreasing. Violent crime is decreasing, and has done that statistically for most of Biden's term as well. I think and the border, Trump had his own flare up there as well, but then we had the pandemic, which basically shut the whole thing down. So substantively, just as a person who would push back against that and say, well, those are not actually factual things that he said to those people in the middle, I would just say to them, you're not just getting someone who sees you on the economy or sees you on inflation or sees you on the border or sees you or your worries on crime. What you're getting is that whole package too. And you're getting that guy that when he was the president, you woke up every morning bracing for this kind of crazy, because this kind of crazy, which we all seem to have collective amnesia about, is very unsettling and stressful and anxiety inducing. And that was on full display. It was like a slow roll into it. But by the end of that whole diatribe, it was like, whoa, this is crazy train. And he didn't have any of the accomplishments he's saying he's promising for the next term. He didn't accomplish any of it for the American people. So those moderates who say I was better off financially, which again, statistically speaking, it's probably not true. It's just set up against the price of things. It feels that way. The economy is actually stronger now. They're probably making more money now. They're probably spending more money now. So that's where I would push back against that. But the top line for me is that I don't think anybody reasonable who wasn't watching so that they could talk about it the next day got halfway through that thing. I just think he turned them off. He turned everybody off. It was crazy.
Okay. But he did talk about taxes, and taxes are a real thing for people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's not wrong. Obviously the Democrats always raise taxes and the Republicans want to cut taxes, right? I mean, this is big government versus small government 101. I mean, this is not a new thing that anybody hasn't heard before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with the border the way it is, and with the influx of migrants that we've had, and it's not changing, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better, we are affected by that. Our taxes are affected by that. We have people living here seeking asylum, right, who are going to be sitting here for the next 2 years before they even get a hearing, because they're so backlogged in this country, right? And who's paying for those people to be here? And what jobs are they doing? I spoke to a migrant in New York last year who came here from Ecuador, and he came with 2 of his kids, and then his wife came later with another kid. And to this day, now that was March of 2023, and here we are. We spoke to him again in the fall, still living in a Hilton in Queens, right? And the second interview was conducted via his phone. Okay, how did a man from another country who crossed the border get a phone? How's he feeding his family? He had to call from the street because he had a construction job in Brooklyn. Now, it can't be on the books, right? Can't possibly be on the books. I mean, is he just getting cash? Either way, someone's paying him. Now, that's one guy. That's one family. Now, multiply that by all the people that are here who are in the same position that he's in. And you have to really metabolize that information. And when you have someone like Trump or anybody who gets up here and says, I'm going to put an end to this because on his watch we didn't have this, just by comparison, people are going to listen. There's a lot of uncertainty on the left side right now, a lot of uncertainty. And this week with the Republicans, regardless of all the crazies that have infiltrated that party and live in that party, they're unified. And people want unity. Why would we want all that rhetoric a couple years ago or a year ago or so about, having two Americas and all of that. That's not where we are, and that's not where we should be ever, right? And I do think that right now, with everything that's going on with the Democrats, and then pleading for Biden to step down, and him really not having a strong showing in terms of his public displays of mishaps, I think that when you watch something, and I guess we'll see what happens in a couple weeks, but when you watch a party that is united and seems at its base organized and with purpose, because you have to remember, you talk about religion being in it not having a part in politics, and I 100% agree with you. It shouldn't have that's part of the problem, right? That's part of the problem when it comes to women's right to choose. Mm-hmm. But you do have people in the middle, or undecided voters, whether they're registered as a Democrat or not, who are religious, right? Who mm-hmm. may have some leanings that align with what they heard this week, right? Mm-hmm. Because, that's my take. I really do think that this country needs to feel like things are going to change, and they're going to change for the better. Mm-hmm. And regardless of the mouth that was coming out of he and in all the speeches, everyone was propping him up to be a uniter. And I don't know if you feel this way, Joe, but I feel like the general public doesn't do a deep dive into the rights and the wrongs. They don't, right? They want to read bullet points and make their decisions. And a lot of people vote on feelings.
Oh, right? Yeah, no. 1,000%.
Vote on policy. They vote on feelings. And the display that happened this week, it was well produced. They gave out a feeling that things are going to change for the better.
Well, I would just sort of push back on the idea that things are, first of all, bad, that they were better. Really push back hard on them being better 4 years ago, when 4 years ago Donald Trump was golfing as the refrigerator trucks were filling up with the bodies of our fellow Americans in New York City. Like, I would just push back on all of that, just there. But going back to the first part of that.
Oh, wait, let me be clear. I don't mean when he was in office. I'm saying this rebirth is looking a little different in the backdrop of where the Democrats are right now.
Okay,
that's where I was going, but go ahead.
No, I hear you. And I would, again, push back against the idea that it's a rebirth. I think it's the same, if not worse. We'll go back to, I guess I'll start with the last thing you said first. So this idea of disunity on the left versus unity on the right is it's from your perspective, I totally get that. That's a very legitimate thing to be saying. And my friends are also saying to me right now, what the hell are the Democrats doing? What are they doing? Why are they doing this? We voted in primaries. We thought that we already established this fact. Why are they fighting with each other? And I am not such a Biden stan that I can't understand why people would have concerns, but I am such a Biden stan that I would say, if they had concerns, they would be able to point to policy that reflected their concern when they can't. So it's like he's not up to the job, and yet they can't point to anything he's done during his time in the job where they would say that was indicative of him not being up to the job. So just from a pragmatic perspective, I just don't think that those two things align. I think hopefully the Democrats are all trying to come to the same place, but I think this feels like a coup. It feels like an establishment Democrat, mainstream media conglomerate, commodity, money, something motivated agenda that is being imposed upon the base. And the base is not wavering. I'm reflective of the base, right? So from day one after the debate, it was a lot of soul searching on what had happened, a lot of looking forward, a lot of looking back. But the people who were the loudest voices out of the gate, that said he's got to go right now. We're all the same people in our party and outside of our party who were never on board with him being our candidate, right? So you could just, every one of them, you could draw a straight line back to 2020 when they were saying, no, 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 it's Bernie, it's this person, it's not him. And so I'm not saying that their concerns from that debate were not valid. I'm not saying that it's not a legitimate position to take, that he is slower and older and certainly more physically feeble. He talks slower than he did. But every single person who comes out of any term in the Oval Office comes out really much older. You can see it and feel it. But again, I'm not saying that those concerns are not legitimate. This disunity on the left is bothersome to me because it's unnecessary, in my opinion, and it's more damaging than that debate ever could have been. But when you stack it up next to the unity, which, by the way, I could argue that Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz getting into near fisticuffs on the floor of the RNC is not exactly the image of unity. But when you stack up the disunity what's that?
There's always a few rogues.
I know, right? Yeah. So, but we're disunified about whether or not a lifetime public servant who's accomplished a bipartisan infrastructure bill and the PACT Act, the Marriage Equality Act, the Recovery Act. I'm not the Recovery Act. I can't remember what it's called all of a sudden, but several things that he's done in a bipartisan basis, huge accomplishments, one of the most consequential presidents of our lifetime. So our party has disunity over whether or not that's the person moving forward, even though we voted for him in our primaries. We had a primary process, whether or not people want to call it a legitimate primary process, you could have run, versus the unity behind a twice impeached, 34 times felony convicted, adjudicated rapist business fraud, who had our national security secrets in his fucking bathroom, that bragged about sexual assault, buried his wife in his golf club. Like, the unity behind someone, notwithstanding the fact that they're unified behind someone who incited an attack against the capital of the United States of America in order to remain in the office he'd just been voted out of. So being unified behind a sociopathic madman traitor, I don't know that that's appealing to all that many people compared to, well, these sort of well-intentioned but a little bit full of themselves, what about me, Veruca Salt's over here on the left, are trying to figure out which public servant who wants public good, who isn't a convicted felon and has never incited an attack on our Capitol, should we be running right now? So my argument would be, like, if I was talking to someone who said that they looked really unified at the RNC and that appealed to them because what they're seeking right now is unity, and I agree, as a nation, all of us are hungry for that. The antidote to that is to find humanity and have conversations through the differences that we have. I would say, okay, let me just talk to you about a little bit more about what they're unified behind. And the other thing they're unified behind is something called Project 2025. And 71% of Americans don't know what that is yet, but it's real. Right. And I want them to know about it. I want them to know about what it's going to do to, your safety regulations at work. I want them to know what it's going to do to IVF, contraception, access to abortion. I want them to know what it's going to do to the civil servants who are going to be removed from their jobs and replaced with political appointees. And I'm not just saying that stuff. It's in the Project 2025 itself. It's there.
But that's the Heritage Foundation. I mean, that's a conservative think tank, right? I mean, you can't pin all of the Republican Party and sort of adhere them to there's leftist think tanks as well, right?
Except that Donald Trump said last night that one of the authors of Project 2025 was going to be in charge from day one, in his speech last night.
Right, but
we still have, what's that?
At this point, we still have, at this point a Congress.
Well, at this point.
Right. What's that?
At this point is that's doing a lot of lifting, because you're right at this point.
But at this point we do. And, and that's actually one of the big fears of the Democrats, right? Like they'll lose all control once Donald Trump is in, right? But however, the question of democracy is what we're saying, right? Like, just because they say it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? Because we have a democracy, and now everyone keeps screaming that democracy is under siege or is in jeopardy. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that completely. And I have a feeling this is where you and I are really going to not be united. But during the Biden administration, 2020 to about 2022, actually, I'm sorry. Biden said the pandemic was over in May of 2023 officially, right? That was the official end date of the quote unquote pandemic. Okay. During the pandemic that was dragged out, politicized in the worst way humanly possible. Where was democracy then? Where was the voice of the people then, with the mandates and the you're right and we're right and you're wrong? If you don't get vaccinated, you're in the wrong. Where was the choice during that time? Where was the where was, when it came to the school boards, they had to fall in line with what the government was saying about masking. It was never an option. Never an option. There was no voice louder than the administration at that point. Talk about not unifying. Talk about divisive. Talk about not having the freedom of choice. That happened with the Biden administration, right? Well, when Trump was still in office until he was voted out, and from the March 2020 until the end, he wanted to open businesses. He wanted people to go back to work, and the Dems were the ones who wanted to keep everything shut down, and really, 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 it caused a lot of issues. And I don't know, where were the where was the equality and the voices back then?
Well, I think a lot of the issues, well, first of all, the mandates and the lockdown started with Trump, but they were also, when you're talking about the school boards.
The vaccine mandates?
No, not the vaccine mandates, the lockdown mandates, the original mandates that were in place for,
and
closures.
He was fighting to try to open stuff up, and it was a war.
Well,
he was in opposition. He was getting, overrun by politics, right?
Well,
he go ahead.
He wasn't listening to science. That's the thing. Like, so, well, okay. Remember, even with those measures in place, we got to a point where many thousands of people were dying a day before the vaccines. Many thousands of Americans were dying every single day. It's statistically true.
Well, you said before the vaccines?
Before the vaccines. Right. And actually, many, okay. I think there are more than 1,000 Americans who are dying a day still, even since the vaccines. But that's also a lot of that percentage, and this lines up also politically, a lot of the people who are still dying from COVID are people who've refused to get vaccinated. It's what's scientifically true.
Okay, keep going. I want to hear you.
So there were, I would agree with your premise in terms of things that were done wrong, but I think they were done potentially wrong in the interest of doing the most good. And by the most good, I mean the fewest people dying. And there were conversations at that time, I recall very clearly, Dr. Oz, for one, people were talking about what number of Americans dying was an acceptable number of Americans dying in the middle of a global pandemic. And to me, as a human being, I'm wondering, well, what member of my family is okay for you to sacrifice? Because I would prefer to keep us all alive right now. And I think there were a lot of over corrections, over accommodations, over, mandate measures, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I don't think it was about being anti-democratic. I think it was about trying to be responsible and consider that the common good is that if somebody has, diabetes, or if they're cancer or something else, and you don't know that, exposing them to more of the virus in public when you can help mitigate that is a responsible duty of the government. I understand why that upset a lot of people, but as far as the school board mandates and stuff, that is not on the Biden administration. A lot of those mandates were they decided them for themselves. But I don't think it was anti-democratic to say, as in any more that it's anti-democratic to say that you need to have a vaccine for MMR or for DTaP or for what is the other one that everybody has to have? Polio. I don't think that anybody would consider that anti-democratic. I don't remember being polled on when if I wanted to have that vaccine or not.
Yeah, but you know what, Joe? You actually do have a choice to not get those vaccines. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I'm saying if you decide not to vaccinate your kids, they're not coming for you, and they can still go to school. And not that the COVID vaccine was a consideration in the whether they could be schooled or not, right? There were separations there, like, oh, if your kid's vaccinated, they can attend class, and when someone else, as they made it available, they started to separate the vaccinated from the unvaccinated, of who was able to attend class and who had to go home and isolate. And
they didn't do that here.
Well, I mean, obviously it went from, again, an individual, right? Like public school systems and whatever, but that happened.
Yeah.
And it happened here where I am. And, and then the test to stay, like if someone had COVID in your kid's class and then they were considered exposed, right? Like they had this option of like test to stay, so you had to like test your kid every day. Did not do it. I did not do that. I refused, but in order for my kid to go to school, I have to stick a swab up there. I mean, where are we in this country right now? But that's a whole other conversation. That's a pandemic debate. My issue was more how prolonged it was, how controlling it was, and no one was able to do the things they wanted to do unless you masked, unless you did this, unless you did that. Now they say you had a choice not to vaccinate, a choice that I absolutely took, and I did not. However, they tried to limit the type of life that you lived if you didn't. It didn't last forever, but show a vax card to get into a bar. What about the nurses? What about the medical staff that was mandated to stick a new pharmaceutical in their body? No exceptions. Deadline is at this point. Otherwise, you're out of a job. And that happened. It did happen. And that happened with multiple industries. The police. I mean, so yeah, you could say it was for the betterment of an entire society. I mean, they can make that argument. They're going to make that argument until God knows when. But people lost their jobs. They lost their businesses because they didn't have a choice. And not having a choice is not a democracy.
Well, if you want to talk about how we ended up in this prolonged scenario, you really have to lay the blame 100% at Trump's feet. I mean, 98%, right? Because this is somebody who
what?
Trump. Sorry, did I break up? So
just for a second, I didn't hear.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, Trump's mismanagement, his absolute fumbling and bumbling and dithering of and denying forever of what was happening, and his mismanagement of the pandemic created a situation, and also the sowing mistrust in science, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, created a situation in this country that made us the number one leader in COVID deaths per capita. And again, I don't know if we're probably not going to want to get into it. We probably shouldn't get into a debate on what set of facts and science you rely on, but we should not have ever accepted more than 1 million Americans dying. And I mean, we all know people who died, right? So a friend of mine was called that his father had died in his nursing home. And after the fact, he was just got a phone call. He's dead. You can't have a funeral. You can come and see him. Nobody else can. I mean, those kinds of stories. We all have someone in our lives that we know that was directly impacted.
And that was a disgrace, by the way.
Oh, well,
keeping the elderly separated from their families. I mean, that too.
Well, again, those were not choices that were imposed upon people by Joe Biden. Those were choices that were imposed upon people by, first of all, not having a roadmap, but also those institutions didn't know what to do, and that was what they did. And Donald Trump was president when it first hit and was the worst statistic. Well, not the death toll, because Joe Biden's been president longer. But I would say, again, to that anti-democratic component to it, you can choose not to vaccinate. No one ever said you couldn't. You can choose not to vaccinate your kids for polio, but in every state in this country, it is required for entry in public schools. You can get a religious exemption, but you have to have a religious exemption. So there are, things that come with your choices. You have to accept the things that come with your choices. I could choose to drive drunk. I could choose to drive without a driver's license. I shouldn't be driving without a driver's license. If I get caught driving without a driver's license or driving while I'm drunk, I'm going to have the things that come with it. So choosing not to get vaccinated at that time in this country, because the intention was to keep fewer Americans from dying, if at all possible, because that's not a choice that every American made to sacrifice their life to go to ShopRite. I think it was in the interest of the public good. I do think, as I said, we were navigating this very unique, once in a lifetime situation. I understand how it would have felt like people were imposing their choices on you. But again, I go back to that person who's got an underlying condition, a pre-existing condition, which would make potentially going just to the post office, a life or death roll of the dice. And so what about their choices? What about their freedom? Why do we have to impose upon them a reality where that is their
well, you could reverse that, though. You could say people with underlying conditions like the ones that they know of, which is diabetes and obesity and everything else. Maybe the advisory should have gone out to those people. Listen, you are at higher risk. If you're over 65, you are at higher risk. So these are your choices. But the rest of us who don't have these conditions, we had to do what the people who had underlying conditions did. I mean, why didn't they just isolate? Why didn't they just? I mean, I think I just don't understand why people's what's that?
Doesn't that feel unfair to punish them for being unwell?
Well, no, it's not about punishment. It's just about how do you take an entire population of people and impose upon them job loss, a new pharmaceutical. And, okay, you say you have a choice, but let's be real. I mean, you were prohibited to do other things, right? And it became, again, down to this, we're right and you're wrong mentality, which I think lends itself to a whole other conversation that we can have another time about the far left, about, it's no longer live and let live from the liberals, right? Because I always considered myself a liberal and I was live and let live. You do you, I'll do me. It's all good, right? You don't have to live how I live and I don't have to live how you live. Now the far left, and again, this is for another time, this is what we believe. And if you don't believe it, then you're wrong. Not freedom of choice, not freedom of diversity. It's like they're the party of diversity, but if you don't believe in exactly what they consider to be diverse or an acceptable thing, then your diversity of having an opinion is discarded as wrong.
Yeah.
But that is for another day.
Yeah, that is for another. I would just say that I don't think that the far left positions on those things are what sets the policy for the government at the moment, or for Joe Biden. He's very much a centrist in that way. And so I feel like he's been very, sensitive to and accommodating of a myriad of different perspectives on things. And just if we're talking about, people who want to strip away your autonomy to choose, I mean, we're talking about the alternative being a party that has struck down our fundamental human right, long held 50-year human right to bodily autonomy, and also is seeking to take away our access to IVF, take away our access to public education, which that is in Project 2025, and they've already said that they want to dismantle it. IVF, contraception, they want to dismantle voting rights. They want to control, in Florida, what words you can say as an educator. The alternative to what I believe is a centrist democratic sort of policy position is so far extreme that they're mandating the Bible in Oklahoma schools, that they're putting the 10 Commandments in Louisiana schools, that they'll fire you in Georgia if you're a teacher who shows a Disney movie that has two moms in it. So I think you're right. And I think there's a conversation to be had about finding some middle ground where people feel imposed upon, and that conversation should be had, especially as it pertains to our bodies, right? You and I 1,000% agree on that. I agree with you on that.
And what you're saying about the schools and things. So now you're talking about an extreme on the right, who's responding to the extremes on the left, and both
are wrong.
Are not. Yeah, right. Both are not right.
Yeah, the only problem
are going too far.
Right, but the only problem with the right in terms of this extremism is that it's not an outlier. This is not an aberration. This is the trend, and you don't have to look very far because you can see it's already underway in a lot of red states, which are modeling what this would look like on a national level. I mean, Florida, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Idaho. These are states that are already implementing a lot of these what would be far right extreme measures, but are not. To them, that's the policy and platform of the Republican Party at large.
Yeah. Well, right. So the loudest voices have become the hardcore conservatives, right?
Yeah, I don't know that.
But you would argue that the far left isn't the majority in the Democratic Party. That would be your argument.
Oh yeah, no, they're not. I'm absolutely positive of that, and I can tell you how you can know, and it's literally physical. Joe Biden is our president right now, and Joe Biden is being argued by not just AOC, which is also ironic because she was with Bernie, but by me and the base who I relate to and who speak the same language as I do when it comes to politics, which is not far left. I mean, I'm not out there, imposing upon others my wishes for, them to be able to do sports or whatever. I can have my opinions. I don't feel like mandating that for anybody else. In the same way that I don't feel like mandating that a 10-year-old should have her rapist baby. You know what I mean? I don't think that the party would have Joe Biden at the helm if the far left were the ones really sort of in control. It's certainly not the case, but I do not identify as far left.
Of course. No, and I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I just don't know if the extremists in the extreme conservatives are the majority on the right. I don't know if they are. I know that Trump is playing to his people right now, right? It's a campaign. It's a race. But I guess the fear with Trump, though, I know the fear with Trump is you just don't know what he's going to do, right? So who is he going to listen to? Is he going to listen to the loudest voices? Does he really believe in half the stuff that's coming out of his mouth? I tend to put Trump in a category of he's all about money. He's all about, keeping the money in this country and keeping the most money for whoever's making it, and then everything else is politics to him, That's why he, I think, wouldn't ever support the idea of a federal, although I don't even know why I'm saying this. How can you even predict what the man would do? But
he's telling us, though. He's telling us what he's going to do.
No, but he already said in several ways that he would never. We're talking about a woman's right to choose. I don't think we're in a good place with that right now. Obviously, you and I agree with that on Roe v. Wade, but he also doesn't believe in a federal blanket ban on abortion, and he's leaving it back to the states, which is a very middle position for him to take. Will that change when he gets in? Who knows? And that's why he becomes the comic book villain that he has been known to be. And but by the way,
yeah,
can we say this for a second? I'm taking that side in this. I'm trying to cherry pick things that we could argue, that we may not totally agree on. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm voting for Donald Trump.
Oh yeah.
Let's just be clear.
Oh no, I know. No, I know.
Okay.
I think it's the thing about abortion, which is weird, is I think that what he's trying to do is play to the middle. And make it look like he's being reasonable on this thing he doesn't actually care about. And I would wager to guess, and I think I have nothing to back this up that is factual. I think just that people know, going off of who he is, he's probably paid for a couple of abortions himself, right? Like, and by the way, he did say to Tim Russert, long ago, that he was a Democrat and that he firmly believed, a New York Democrat, no less, that he firmly believed in a woman's right to choose. I think Donald Trump is changeable in terms of, like a weathercock is changeable in terms of which way the wind is blowing. If he thinks the wind is blowing, so he'll get to the destination he wants to get to faster, that's the way he's going to point, right? So I just think, I think he also knows that
politician,
right? Yeah. Well, he also selected J.D. Vance to be his vice president, and J.D. Vance is very extreme on abortion. He believes in a complete federal ban. He also believes for no exceptions. Not that exceptions are exceptions, because what we've seen is that the exceptions don't work. Because then it's like the doctor's like, well, you know what? I know this is an exception. I know you were raped, or I know you're about to maybe die, but I'm not really sure what I can do here because I don't want to go to jail. So the exceptions don't actually statistically work, which means that exceptions are a joke. But well,
that actually. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you done?
Well, real quick, I just wanted to say that about this party, about the loudest voices and the most extreme voices not being in control of the party. I would say that this RNC, if it did one thing, back to your unity point, it's that it solidified once and for all. And every Republican, former Republican, never Trumper I've spoken to has said the same, that what Donald Trump has done now is he has solidified once and for all that it is not really the Republican Party anymore, as your grandpa knew it, or your dad knew it, or my dad was a member of it until W. It is MAGA. This was Trump saying to the world, but particularly to other Republicans and to the country, that this is his party, that J.D. Vance is young to carry the mantle. I could go on to the musings on my particular take on why, but so that this is solidifying that this is MAGA. This is not the Republican Party as we knew it. If you saw their party platforms, it's absolutely hysterical, because it's almost like, it looks like a 5-year-old wrote it. It's like, end sad faces once and for all. Yeah. And I would say that they've yielded 100%.
Many sad
Yeah.
faces.
And it's also a party that got rid of someone who I've never agreed with on anything ever in my life until now, Liz Cheney, because Liz Cheney wouldn't get in line with Donald Trump wanting to incite an insurrection and plot a coup and reverse, our votes. And so she was cast out of their party. So Adam Kinzinger left because he knew he would be cast out. And these people, they get targets on their backs. And I don't use that word to incite any violence. I mean it in the metaphorical way. But I think they've yielded completely to the loudest, angriest voices in the most extreme positions. And they're not offering anything. And they didn't offer anything last night or for the entirety of the week that spoke to solutions or spoke to real problems. I mean, you could talk about taxes, you can say immigration, but there's two things that you're missing that are glaring out, like, to me, not you. I don't mean to point at you. I mean, just generally speaking in that conversation that they didn't address, which is number one, taxes under Donald Trump really didn't get cut significantly for the middle class. The taxes, I'll go into this real fast too, the tax bill that he was able to get through benefited the richest Americans and the top tier and the corporations. And it just made the already million and billionaires richer. And that tax situation has also added, and this is without the pandemic, $7.8 trillion to our national debt, which is the third largest increase relative to the size of our economy in our nation's history. And that's debt our kids and our grandkids are going to have to pay. It's like $28,000 in additional debt for each American citizen. And that's not including the pandemic that he bungled. So taxes and that the little bit that was carved out for the middle class is set to expire. And when it does, he's probably not going to reinstitute it, even though he says he will, but he won't, because it doesn't benefit him to do it. If we have a democracy at that point, because we have a Supreme Court, he helped to seat that said that a sitting president can essentially do anything they want so long as it's an official act. And when you're talking about a guy who believes he can shoot somebody in the face on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, that's not a really great proposition. And a Senate that won't check him on like an insurrection, to me, it's a blank check handed to a madman. And I just, it's a bad combination.
Well said. So we're at the point where we're going to say so the funny thing is, we talked a lot about the differences that we have and the differences of opinions, and but we do align as well. Mm-hmm. And we sort of spoke a little bit about obviously a woman's right to choose, right? And it kind of brings up the idea about the Republicans, women in the Republican Party who are total Trumpers, total MAGA. And now, granted, again, separation of church and state, you're talking about religious people, right? Not everyone who's a Republican is religious, but they're bringing religion into this, right? So if you are a religious woman who believes in you are pro-choice, Donald Trump is your guy, right? And it kind of begins and ends there in terms of like, what would, when you start to question why would a woman vote for Donald Trump, I say that's the starting line for them, right?
Wait, because he's religious?
They are. No, I'm saying, I say religious because if you're pro-choice, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with religion. All right, let's take religion out of it. We'll just say if you are a woman who's a Republican and you are pro-choice, Donald Trump is your guy, right? But what I wrestle with, aside from that, they're also very traditional, right? There are two genders. There's this, there's that, there's a lot of traditionalism on the Republican side, right? Let's bring America back to what it was and what the founding fathers wanted, right? All these things. But you have a man who doesn't even symbolize any of that, right? Mm-hmm. This is a man on his third wife. And like you said, buried the first wife in his golf course with no headstone. I mean, how do they find her? I mean, how do the kids even go for that?
Probably a metal detector.
Right? What's that?
It's a metal detector. Where's Ivana's jewelry? Where's she? Sorry, I don't know why I did that accent.
I mean, it's kind of, that part's kind of wild. But, and then you have him clearly hanging out with Jeff Epstein. I mean, that leaves anything to the imagination, right? You also have a man who was convicted of rape.
Well,
and
found liable.
Also convicted of paying off a porn star, right? So these are things that don't fall in line with traditional family values, right? The nuclear family, the dog, the two, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's where my mind goes with some of these women. Pro-choice is one thing, but how do you think they reconcile the rest of what he embodies as a man and as a person and as a man of God, where he's selling Bibles now. He's a man of God.
Right. I mean, I think forever I've asked this question as well in a broader way, not just about women, but about human beings as a whole, because for them to be able to square having somebody, and forever this will bother me, amongst all the things he's done, one among the most, when he mocked the disabled reporter. This is somebody that Nikki Haley rightfully said was right, like the embodiment of everything we tell our kindergartners not to do, right? Which is true. true. I mean, he's all of the 7 deadly sins rolled into one human being. And I call him fictional Trump. The fictional Trump is the one that they just had the convention for. Fictional Trump is the one they fight for. Fictional Trump is the one they rally behind because they have to. Because there's some cognitive dissonance, first of all, where they can't really accept that this person is fundamentally representative of everything that they're not, which is bad stuff, lack of morality, cruelty, abuse, being a bully, like all those things that they are like, I hate that. I don't like that. They can't say that while seeing the reality of who he is, right? It's like, so there's this separation where they like, my therapist, I have a therapist, I recommend therapists to everybody. She said that I had and she used a technical term for it related to the debate where she was like, you've literally removed yourself from this. It's like extracted myself from the reality of what I watched. It's a psychological phenomenon where I know what I watched and I remember parts of it, but part of me can't remember literally sitting there in Biden headquarters watching it because some part of me has removed that sort of like traumatic event from my psyche, which is crazy, but true. Like if I go back and watch it, I'm like, oh God, I saw that. It's weird, but that's what our brains do. And to accommodate other things that we want to believe, right? So like, I want to believe that I didn't experience that. Not that I don't believe that he's still, capable of the job, et cetera, et cetera. But that moment I want to just take away. That's what so many of these people are doing in general. But women, first of all, he's not pro-choice. Again, he put JD Vance on the ticket, but he's also trying to play that one safe. But I think in sort of the larger themes, women who think that this person who bragged about grabbing women by their privates, is their guy, right? Like, it makes me sad. It breaks my heart because I think about my own daughter. I think about a world that women who aren't able to open their eyes and see the reality of this man are going to leave for my daughter. It scares the shit out of me, as I'm sure it does you and a lot of people right now, a lot of parents, and not just my daughter, my son. If he can't, let's just say theoretically, hypothetically, he gets a girl pregnant and is 16 and it was an accident and he couldn't get a condom. I don't know what it is. Is he forever going to have to, have his life changed by that? I'm also worried about what it tells my son about women and their value. I'm very worried about what kind of messaging my son would be susceptible to from a man named JD Vance at the second most powerful position in our country, telling him that abused women should stay in abusive marriages because it's what's best for the kids. Like, what does that tell my son and anyone else's son out there going, what? Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like why shouldn't she sacrifice her physical body or emotional capacity? Why shouldn't she sacrifice for the kids? And yeah, back to the women though, it breaks my heart because I want to like shake them a little bit. But I would also say that I don't think that there are as many of them as we would think on the surface. And what I'm going to point to sort of bear that out is all these ballot measures in all these red states on abortion, on reproductive care that have passed in Kansas and Ohio and I believe Idaho is one of them. And it's on the ballot in Florida this year, right? Yeah. And I think what has happened is that since that privacy of our choices, our reproductive choices was taken from us, we recognize that we still have the privacy of that moment in facing the ballot, where it's you and your ballot. It's not your husband. It's not your family. It's not your church. It's you and your choice. And I think women on this issue, if not all, but on this one for sure, overwhelmingly see this as something they cannot support. And so hopefully I hope you're right. Yeah. And I think And I don't think that it's exclusive.
You and I are on the East Coast. I know you and I try to see a bigger picture here, but you can be sort of overshadowed or sort of blind to the rest of the country and how not as exposed and not as open-minded it can be in the all in the middle, especially in the red states, especially in these more rural areas where it's just not the same lifestyle, right? We just have a different thing on the East and West Coast that doesn't go on in the majority of the middle.
Yeah.
Except for Colorado, I guess.
Yeah.
Although
Colorado has Lauren Boebert. Colorado has Lauren Boebert. And Colorado's.
Yeah, well, but they also have their first gay governor, who's still in power. But I just think that it's very frightening and it's very confusing, right? To see how far we've come as women, right? And how far we still have to go, especially when you have someone like Donald Trump up there and being put on a pedestal, and you look out into the crowd and you see all of these women in tears, like they're looking at Elvis. And
he thinks it looks like Elvis. Remember that?
Yes, that was the other comparison. He's Jesus, he's Elvis, and he's one more person.
Gandhi. I don't know. Lincoln. I don't know.
It was oh my God, why can't I'm blanking now. Oh my God, I did a whole shtick on this. But yes, it is disconcerting, and it confuses me because I always think, women unite on certain areas, right? And this is not one that, in my opinion, is negotiable. Right. Like a human right. It's not about, it's only placed on women, but it's about human rights, right? It's about, we are people. Yeah. We shouldn't have a separate set of rules, right? And so at the very least, it shocks me regardless. I don't know why it shouldn't, nothing tends to shock me, but they, unless they are pro-choice, that's the only thing because that to me would be the only thing. Like, let's say I was a Republican. Let's pretend I'm a Republican and I'm a conservative and I'm all these things, but I'm a pro-choice individual. Let's just say that's where I kind of
that's your one issue
off when it comes to the party. Then it's a no-go because you're voting for something that is against the core of who you are and who you can't change, right? Yeah. I can't change the fact that I'm a woman, right?
Right.
And so I wrestle with the idea of, like, I get, the Republican platform, but when it comes to this one issue, I guess I just can't reconcile that portion of it. The unless you are pro-choice,
right?
And if you, and then all the other hypocrisy that goes along with the other thing I said, which was that if you're a traditional person and you're a constitutionalist and you think it should go back to what the founding fathers wanted, how does Donald Trump fit into that puzzle in that way? He with all that he's done, and it's proof. I mean, the things that he's done, it's not an opinion. He's done these things.
Right.
Right. He's been married 3 times.
Right.
Not that getting remarried is a big deal, but I'm saying these people, pride themselves on, this nuclear family idea, which that's got to go anyway.
Well, right.
But that's right. So right. I mean, fine. But just the crime, just the way he looks at women, like you said, grab them by the, and then all the stuff that he doesn't strike me. It's a little light way to put it. He doesn't strike me as pro.
No. And this is 1000%. If you ask me, and if you look around at the, just the facts, this feels very much like a war on women, because not just on abortion, but we have the EMTALA case that went to the Supreme Court, which is the Supreme Court essentially kicked back down to the circuit court, which is a lot of, confusing language, but essentially could mean that if a woman who is miscarrying goes to the emergency room presenting with sepsis, because her miscarriage is poisoning her, that the emergency room can say, sorry, we don't have to give you, miscarriage care. You're going to have to just roll the dice on this because this is something that is not legal, an abortion in our state, or I could lose my job as a doctor, or I could end up in prison, or whatever it is, that the hospital does not have to provide life-sustaining care to that woman. So that, to me, that's still undecided, essentially. I mean, it's as it was before because they kicked it back down. So it's not been dismantled yet, but that it's even a question when if a guy went into the emergency room was like, my dick is broken. It's bleeding into my body. Can you help me with my broken dick? They'd be like, get him into the emergency room right now. They wouldn't be like, I don't know. I'm not supposed to touch broken dicks. Like, I got to check if this is legal or not. I don't want to go to prison for touching your broken dick. I'm just saying, it shouldn't even be a question. And that's one thing.
Well, that is the perfect way to wrap this all up. Our government is full of broken dicks.
It is full of broken dicks. It is full of broken dicks. And I just, for one last one, I think, the funny thing is, and it's not necessarily something to laugh at because it's really sad, but the funny thing is they're walking around with fake bandages on their ears. Okay. This is crazy times. This is crazy. That's cult behavior. It's hysterical, but it shouldn't be funny because this gun violence is terrible and AR-15s are weapons of war and it's terrible, but they're all like, duh. They didn't do that with Uvalde. They didn't do that with anything else.
I know, but and then you got, I could argue both ways. I'm not as bothered by it, as there's people in the audience from Wisconsin with cheese on their head too. We could go.
Yeah, they do that at a football game though. Yeah, they do that at a football game.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, but that's cultish. I think sports are cultish.
Yeah, they are. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to argue that. Yeah, you're 100% right. And I'm not going to argue that.
So,
I'm not a Biden cultist either because half the time I think I could be accused of being one, and that's fine. I get it. It's fair.
But I'm just saying, like, that herd mentality exists everywhere. Of course that was going to happen, but hey,
bandage?
The silver lining
you wouldn't wear masks.
Now we... What's
sorry,
that?
but a bandage? I'm sorry. That's kind of silly. Like,
people are extremists.
Yeah.
look at the Patriot guy. Yeah, whatever. But
there's a guy who dresses as the wall. He's even got a fake wall. There's a guy who dresses as the wall guy. Yeah, there's a second wall guy. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but the silver lining, Joe, is that now we know everybody's go-to Halloween costume for this year is going to be
the bandage.
What a simple! You don't even have to go to the store and spend more money in this economy. All you have to do is go get a bandage.
Yep.
Or do this. Some blood right here, a bandage on your ear, and the cheapest Halloween costume that you will find in 2024.
Walk around educating people on how much the ear bleeds. That's it. That's your whole Halloween costume.
Oh, we didn't even touch on that. And that I actually laughed out loud. He's like, well, we learned something today. That was
But he always does that. He always says many people didn't know. Many people didn't know. Many people didn't know that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. Maybe many people didn't know that water was wet. It's like, no, many people knew. We all knew that. You're not the first person to stumble upon this information just because you didn't know.
I didn't know the ear. I didn't know, though. I didn't know the ear bled that much.
I never... But we still don't even have a report from the doctors, so I don't even know what happened to his ear. Like, I don't even know.
I know.
That's what's weird.
He really, at the end, he should have probably
right. Well, it was sliding off. The makeup and the sweat was taking it off. So I was like, well, if he talks another 4 hours, maybe by the time this is over, we'll get a good look at that damn thing.
It always looks like it's about to come off. I'm surprised. Like, it just looks like it's almost like an envelope. It's like an envelope that
we live in weird times. These are weird times. Like Hulk Hogan is ripping his shirt off. What is somebody in, like, I don't know, Bangladesh looking at when they're like, what the fuck is happening over there? Aliens are like, I'm good. What's happening?
Oh, well, you know what? You're not wrong. And when you say weird, I hear scary, actually. It's more, you have to laugh because honestly, I think crying is the only other option. So right. I guess we just have to hope for the best. But, we got some interesting months coming up before this election, Joe. Oh, yeah. I don't think you and I, where are we at in this conversation? We were going to cap this off. Yeah. We could probably talk till Tuesday at this point,
but
we'll save it.
Between now and Tuesday, there'll be 17 Tuesdays, so it'll feel that way anyway. Yeah, and that's why when we were talking about this podcast, this show, and why we kind of settled on the idea that we'll include the word funny, it's because for both of us, we understand that I think of it as a spoonful of sugar, right? That helps the medicine go down. I think that if you don't find something to laugh at in this moment in time, whatever it is, because you got to find something, right? Because otherwise, it's over.
Well, that's always been my thing too. People are. I keep playing with my hair.
I always do it. I get all my trolls love it. They're like, why is Joe always playing with her hair? It's because I'm deeply insecure, okay? And my hair is my mask. Okay, do you understand?
I can't stop getting it. My thing is, and see what we just did? I would argue that 75% of America can't do that anymore. The way everything's so contentious, right? We can disagree, but we can find something that we agree on, or we can agree to disagree. But the one thing that I think is essential, and you think so too, is if we can't share an opinion, we can share a laugh.
Hell yeah. And not every laugh is going to be funny to everybody. That's okay. Not every joke is going to have, a punchline that lands everywhere. But
and obviously, and then women aren't funny. You remember that rhetoric?
Oh, I've been told that my whole life, right? 1,000% do I believe that that's craziness. But yeah, I've been told that my whole life, and you know what? That's a bunch of bullshit. Because the funniest and we'll have a conversation in another episode about who we think is funny and who we don't think is funny. But to me, the funniest person on the planet is probably Chelsea Handler. We can disagree about that, whatever. But she's a woman, and I love her.
That's so funny.
Obviously, she's a woman.
Oh well, you and I have a future conversation about two people. One of them being Chelsea Handler, and one of them being. Let's let them. We'll tell that in the next time we speak. The other person,
right?
And I definitely don't agree on at this point. But okay, cool. So this was great, and I can't wait to see what happens next that we can kind of wrestle with, and and that's the first, and that concludes the 10-year-long episode of. So the funny thing
is about trying to launch a half-an-hour podcast when you on all of these issues. So the funny thing is, it's pretty much impossible, but we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to thank God for editing.